What's up, everybody? It's your boy Rebel here, and for today I have a very special episode. The first ever Rebels retrospective not discussing a video game. Today I'll be taking a look back at one of my favorite movies ever, Back to the Future. Wait.
Are you me?
Shut up.
How am I here? I mean, how are you?
Shut up. I'm here from the future. You look like an idiot.
I'm sorry, it's just you just came back from the future and I was about to make a video about Back to the Future.
I know, you idiot. I'm from the future.
Ah.
But that video is actually why I'm here. It sucks.
Oh, well, I'm still gonna make it.
Oh no, yeah, I know. It's still gonna suck.
Thanks?
Yep.
Well, that was weird.
Hey, was Future Us just in here?
Why the hell are you a cowboy?
Shut up. Time travel.
21 gigawatts!
Ah, time travel. An idea made popular by H.G. Wells in his 1895 novel The Time Machine. Since then, it's been the premise of many great franchises such as Terminator, Doctor Who, and Quantum Leap. And not since H.G. Wells' The Time Machine as a work of fiction spawned more theories regarding time travel than the 1985 classic Back to the Future. While other works of fiction revolving around time travel had more of either a historic educational glimpse into an era beyond anyone's living years, or a sci-fi exploration taking you into the far-off stretches of the distant future, Back to the Future stayed in two relatively well-known times upon release. The then present-day 1985, and a mere 30 years prior in 1955, a time many parents watching this movie in theaters would remember.
So unlike most works of traveling through time, Back to the Future doesn't have the knowledge gained from witnessing historic events or the views into utopian futures. Instead, it focuses on the ramifications of interfering in your own family's history, the cause and effect of slightly altering relatively recent pasts, with a heavy emphasis on a form of the grandfather paradox or possibly the bootstrap paradox, with smaller instances of the bootstrap paradox, probably, maybe not. And what that means is the movie doesn't have the protagonist seeking to escape the norm. Instead, it's their drive to return to it.
So not only is this one of the best cinematic takes on time travel to date, with an amazing and well-detailed take on the act of time travel with the creation of the flux capacitor, it's well-directed and has an amazing soundtrack by Alan Silvestri that rivals that of a few John Williams scores. It also featured music by Huey Lewis and the News made directly for the movie, being as that was super popular at the time for some reason.
And the way that theme hits. No, not that one.
That's the power of love.
No, the one with the...
Then you have when Marty ends up in 1955 for the first time, where he makes his way into Hill Valley's town square to Mr. Sandman playing. This movie mixes original songs relevant to the 1980s with Huey Lewis, songs from the 1950s such as the aforementioned Mr. Sandman and Earth Angel, and an original theme that plays at perfect times. So as far as movie soundtracks and scores are concerned, this one's a classic.
As far as the story goes, it's the classic time travel tale. Boy goes back in time, accidentally almost stops himself from existing, almost knowingly gets to second base with his mom, knowingly. You know, your basic time travel story. But there are a few specifics I'd like to go over, so in case you need it, here's a really quick story refresher.
So the movie starts with clocks. Clocks everywhere. It is a time travel movie, try to keep up. In fact, there is a clock with a miniature Harold Lloyd hanging on it, mimicking the 1923 silent film Safety Last, as well as foreshadowing one of the most memorable scenes from later in the movie. The main character, Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox, shows up and answers a ringing phone where he's told by someone named Doc to meet him at Twin Pines Mall at 1:15 a.m. and that it's actually 8:25.
It's 8:25? Damn. I'm late for school.
We then meet Marty's girlfriend, Jennifer. Marty plays a Huey Lewis song in front of Huey Lewis, talks about a date with Jennifer when a lady tries to get donations to save the clock tower that was struck by lightning.
Clock blocking him. I'm sorry.
Marty sees a dope truck, goes home to his mediocre family where his dad's car is totaled by his supervisor Biff. His mom Lorraine drinks thinking about how she met her husband George, played by Crispin Glover.
What was it, George? Bird watching?
Bird watching? Imagine getting hit by a car while bird watching. Thank God it's so much safer watching birds today.
That night, he goes to the Twin Pines Mall where Doc, played by Christopher Lloyd, shows him his latest invention,
Well, it's a DeLorean.
a time machine.
Also, I just like to point out that DeLoreans have gull wings, which means that Doc would have either had to drive the DeLorean into the van just to pull it back out when Marty got there, or Doc was able to get into the back of the van through the cab and then get in through the window of the DeLorean, both of which seem really hard.
Doc then puts his dog in the car and remote control drives it around before...
My calculations are correct. This baby hits 88 miles per hour. You're gonna see some serious shit.
I love this line. Dude, you just aimed a car at yourself. Of course we're gonna see some serious shit. Even if your calculations aren't correct, we're either going to see time travel or what the police would only assume to be two people murdered by a sheepdog coke dealer.
Well, the car and the doggo traveled through time 1 minute into the future, showing up in front of Doc and Marty moments later. Doc then explains the time machine to Marty, one of the very few exposition dumps in the whole movie. He explains falling and hitting his head exactly 30 years ago, while setting the time machine to that very date. He explains that it needs plutonium, which was mentioned in the intro being stolen by Libyan terrorists. One thing of plutonium per trip, Doc says, and reloads a new plutonium capsule. Said Libyan terrorists show up and shoot Doc. Marty hops into the DeLorean to try to escape, probably forgetting how the time machine works, and inadvertently ends up traveling to the set date of 1955. He ends up on a farm where their mall was, the family mistaken for an alien. He runs over one of two baby pine trees, parks the DeLorean behind a sign for a future plot of homes, and walks to Hill Valley Town Square. Mr. Sandman starts playing. The grimy town square from his time is well kept with classic cars all over, Ronald Reagan movies playing, and a full-service gas station.
I have to say, I think this is one of the best scenes in the movie. The shift in tone from escaping the terrorists to unknowingly ending up in the past. The intensity that quickly changes into confusion is something that is so rarely seen pulled off this flawlessly. Just the stark contrast between nighttime with guns to daytime upbeat in the 50s. It's truly just a great scene.
Anyways, Marty tries to track down Doc and runs into his dad George at the diner where Biff, his dad's bully, is being a giant dude. George leaves the diner and Marty chases after him, only to catch him birdwatching. Well, birdwatching, this happens and Marty pushes George out of the way and gets hit, leading to the first time Marty changes the course of history.
As explained by Marty's mom Lorraine, she met George, Marty's dad, when her dad hit him with a car. But her dad didn't hit him with the car, he hit Marty with the car, which means Marty wouldn't exist anymore, which means how would Marty be able to go back?
After waking up without pants on with his mom sitting beside him,
what the fuck?
he meets his grandparents and aunt and uncles, leaves to find Doc, and convinces him that he's from the future. Doc finds out that he needs 1.21 gigawatts of power to send the car to the future, and without plutonium, the only way is lightning.
Unfortunately, you never know when or where it's ever gonna strike.
Fortunately, Marty knows exactly when lightning will strike, so while waiting for the lightning strike, Marty has to introduce his mom and dad.
You know, since he cock-blocked himself out of existence.
He tricks his dad to ask his mom to the school dance by dressing up in a radiation suit and playing Van Halen into his dad's ears while he's sleeping. They run into Biff at the diner where Marty trips him and runs away, creating a skateboard and causing Biff to drive into a truck full of manure. Marty's mom ends up asking Marty to the dance.
Weird. And then Marty comes up with the plan to get his mom and his dad back together by hooking up with his mom and taking advantage of his mom. I'm sorry, there's just no way to really talk about that scene without getting at least a little disgusted.
So there's Marty with his mother about to get down so George can save the day. Except it's Biff and Marty gets his ass kicked while Biff almost...
Well, God, I don't even think I can describe this scene on YouTube. How do I say this? He raps with an E.
So Biff essentially starts to
Raps with an E.
Marty's mom, and Marty gets thrown into the back of a car. Some racial stuff happens.
Hey, beat it, Spook. This don't concern you.
You call him Spook, Peckerwood.
George, thinking Marty's in the car with Lorraine, opens the door. He gains the strength to punch Biff in the face, changing the course of history in a major way for the second time. Marty sees and checks the picture of him and his siblings and finds that he's still disappearing.
Also, I didn't bring this up earlier, but there's a picture of Marty, his sister, and his brother that is slowly disappearing over time. Also, I'm just gonna go ahead and get this out of the way. It disappears with the firstborn first, the secondborn second, and Marty, the youngest, third. You'd think if time was unraveling backwards, that the youngest would be the first to disappear, but whatever, I get it. It's just a movie. I don't care.
Being that Marty is still disappearing, the dance has to keep going, so Marty ends up playing guitar until his dad kisses his mom, ensuring his existence, I guess. Marty leaves to meet Doc at the clock tower. Marty slips Doc a note he wrote about the night he creates the time machine, which Doc finds and rips up, unwilling to know too much about his own future. The wire connected to the clock tower comes loose and Doc has to reattach it.
he's the it's the Doc on the clock.
Marty sets the time a little earlier so he can attempt to save Doc, and upon returning to 1985, finds the Libyan terror is on the way and the DeLorean won't start. He makes it to the Lone Pine Mall just as Doc's shot. He sees himself travel into the past and goes to help Doc, who read Marty's note and wore a bulletproof vest, so he's very much alive. Marty heads home, wakes up the next morning to a successful looking family, a nicer house, and the truck he wanted. He's about to take Jennifer out in the truck when Doc comes to tell them about their children and how they have to go into the future.
And yeah, that's the movie. Marty got the car he liked, and overall he has a better life. I guess the moral of the story is if you go back in time and screw everything up, you can end up getting a better life through sheer dumb luck.
And it seems like they set up the sequel intentionally, but they just wanted to end with the adventure continuing. They had no intention of creating sequels until the commercial success of the first movie took them by surprise. And besides getting into the DeLorean while it's inside the van, there are no flaws in the movie. No flaws. No flaws.
Okay, so there's one flaw I noticed in the movie, but it's just one flaw, and I swear to God I'm not nitpicking here. In fact, the fact that it took me over 30 times of watching this movie to ever notice any time travel flaw is a testament to how great and amazing and well done this movie is. And that flaw is Marty's hand disappearing.
So the picture and hand disappear because Marty made his mom and dad not meet. He has to make them meet. The picture was still disappearing at the dance because they didn't kiss yet, and Marty had to play the guitar. If he didn't play the guitar, the dance wouldn't have continued.
Makes sense, right? So why does his hand still disappear while he's playing the guitar?
If he disappears because he still has to intervene, it makes sense. He's disappearing the last time, yet doesn't have to do anything to save himself. If he didn't have to intervene, the picture would have been fine at that point. So basically, he's still disappearing despite the timeline already being restored.
Yeah, I know it's barely a flaw, but technically it just doesn't make sense. But besides that, this entire movie handles time travel almost flawlessly.
Unlike other works like Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, where if you end up traveling in time, you always had traveled through time, this movie uses multiple timelines. Best example would be Doc being shot. The first time he isn't wearing a bulletproof vest. The second time he is. In more of a closed loop form of time travel, Doc would have always had the vest. The only thing this does is kind of negates the possibility of a bootstrap paradox. Doc used the DeLorean as a time machine, so even though he sees that future him used one as a time machine, it isn't the reason he used the DeLorean. Also that Marty knows the song Johnny Be Good. He plays it and Chuck's cousin Marvin Barry, calls Chuck to show him his song that he ends up writing, but he wrote it prior to hearing it in the past, so he always wrote it first, even though the second time could have been from Marty.
And as for the grandfather paradox, well, that's when you go back in time and kill your grandfather, or in this case, stop your parents from meeting, to where you don't exist. But that means if you don't exist, you never went back in time to stop your parents from meeting or to kill your grandfather. Meaning that you didn't go back in time and stop them from meeting, meaning that you would exist, meaning that you would go back in time to stop them from meeting, which means that you wouldn't exist, which means you wouldn't be able to go back in time to stop them from meeting, which means they would meet, which means you would exist, which means you would be able to go back in time to stop them from meeting, which means you wouldn't exist.
And that's why it's a paradox. However, with with Back to the Future, Marty physically takes time to disappear. And with multiple timelines, the timeline where Marty split up his parents would continue on. It wouldn't create a loop doubling back to Marty's existing.
So basically, Back to the Future was written in a way to not allow for paradoxes. Paradoxi? Paradoxin? Yeah, it essentially foregoes having any paradoxes for the explanation of potentially infinite timelines. Meaning any potential bootstrap paradoxes don't exist. A bootstrap paradox being Doc used the DeLorean because he saw that he had used the DeLorean to send Marty back in time. Meaning that him in the past always saw a DeLorean to know to use in the future. But that's not the case here. There is one Doc that just picked a DeLorean just cuz, and the second Doc that knows to pick a DeLorean because the past Doc did. Meaning that Johnny B. Good was a nod at the audience who knew of the song, not an in-universe explanation of how the song was created. A bootstrap paradox couldn't exist because there is both a timeline to where Marty did and did not travel back into the future, or into the past. I feel like it makes more sense than why the explanation of why it makes sense. I don't know anymore.
Another amazing thing about this movie is the way that it relates the past to the present. The little nods of what Marty, as well as us the viewer, already know. A reference to Ronald Reagan, JFK, and Darth Vader. A mention of his uncle growing up to be in prison. Marty's principal is his dad's principal. The neighborhood where his parents live just beginning construction. And a 50s diner employee who becomes mayor. And one of my favorites and most subtle, the Twin Pines Mall becoming the Lone Pine Mall because Marty accidentally ran over one of the two pine trees upon his arrival in 1955.
Also, there's a line that makes a bit more sense if you know where the initial idea for the movie came from. Co-creator Bob Gale initially had the idea for the movie when he saw his dad's yearbook and saw him in a picture as class president. He then wondered if him and his dad would have been friends if he had been able to go back in time, or if he would have hated him. So the line directed at George,
George, you ever think of running for class president?
is clearly a nod at Bob Gale's dad and the initial idea of where this movie came from, which is pretty cool.
Also, you have just how downright enjoyable the cast is. Michael J. Fox is perfect as Marty McFly, and Christopher Lloyd as Doc has got to be one of the best characters in fiction ever. At least he's one of my favorites. And as weird and awkward as George McFly is, Crispin Glover did a great job in that role, making the fact that he didn't appear in the following two movies a little disappointing. Leah Thompson as Lorraine was great as well. Claudia Wells played Marty's girlfriend Jennifer, however she was replaced by Elizabeth Shue for the next two. But considering her lack of screen time in the first film, wasn't as notable as, say, the recasting of Crispin Glover. Then you had some of the most memorable scenes in film, period. Marty traveling to 1955, the 1955 Hill Valley Town Square, Marty, George, and Biff at the diner, the skateboard maneuver over Biff's car as it drives into manure, Marty playing guitar, and of course Marty traveling back to 1985.
Every scene in this movie has either action, funny dialogue, a slight bit of exposition, or a blend of all three. And it's done pretty amazingly. And that's probably mainly because of director Robert Zemeckis. But with such films as Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Forrest Gump under his belt, it kind of makes sense.
So you have an amazing soundtrack, an amazingly original take on the time travel genre, some of the most memorable scenes full of action and comedy, an incredibly likable cast, and insanely quotable dialogue, all coming together to give us one of the most classic films in modern history. And yes, it is only the first of the three in the trilogy, but it's clearly the best of the three.
However, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's my favorite, so I guess you'll have to stay tuned for the upcoming sequel of this Rebels Retrospectives to figure out which one I like the best. But regardless of whether or not it's my favorite, it's still probably the best of the three.
So I'm assuming you love this movie as much as me if you're watching this. However, if you haven't seen this movie in a while, take this as a suggestion to go rewatch it. It's definitely worth it.
And that's gonna wrap this one up. Thanks a bunch for watching. I really wanted to give you a big thanks if you made it this far. You're awesome, and I love you. I do plan on covering other movies and TV shows as well as my typical content of video games, so be sure to smash that sub button, hit that like button, leave a comment down below, gently click the notification bell. It's been a while since I said that, but I'm not doing any other takes. That was pretty good for not doing it for over a month. And I guess until next time, peace. Well, crap. That did suck. Told you.